Hello, and welcome to this episode of the White House 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, president of the White House Historical Association. Well, today I'm in Los Angeles at the Netflix Epic Studio, and we're going to talk about what it takes to bring the White House to life on the silver screen and on television. From silent films like Thomas Edison's The Martyred Presidents to landmark television programs like The West Wing, and now to streaming platforms, stories about the U.S. presidents and the White House have long been of interest to studios, screenwriters, and audiences. The White House facade and depictions of the Oval Office are instantly recognizable, something that's really helpful when telling those stories. But when you see actors walking through the rooms of the White House, those are sets or visual effects, something that our guest today knows a thing or two about. Production designer Francois Audoux is the French-American master of creating incredible worlds and landscapes for film and for television. His recent work includes production design for A Complete Unknown, the Academy Award-nominated film about singer-songwriter Bob Dylan, as well as the films Ford vs. Ferrari, Wolverine, and Ghostbusters Afterlife. We're talking with him today about his work on The Residents, produced by Netflix and Shondaland, that premiered early in 2025.
Couple things before we get started. Just want to make sure we're all here for the murder of A.B. Winter. If you're here for another murder, that's like a huge problem.
The Residents is really a fun murder mystery that just happens to be set in the White House. The Residents was inspired by a book with a similar name, and the series was created by Paul William Davies, who is also the showrunner, writer, and executive producer. It stars Uzo Aduba as an unconventional consulting detective for the D.C. Metro Police and Giancarlo Esposito as the White House chief usher.
I am going to be dead by the end of the night.
The Residents was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards this year, including Outstanding Production Design for a Narrative Contemporary Program. And you'll understand why after watching and listening to our interview today. Francois, thank you for joining us today, and I'm so excited to talk with you and to see the White House new through your eyes.
Stuart, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be talking to the White House Historical Association.
Well, thank you. Tell us about your background, how you came into this type of work, and what it's like creating these magical scenes and sets for a movie when you're just given an idea or a concept.
Well, I've been doing this for 30 years. I started as a concept illustrator back in the 90s, doing concept design and graphic design, and worked my way up to become an art director, supervising art director, and then eventually a production designer. Production designer has to translate the concept, the words on a page, into a visceral world, a story world, for that everything takes place. So it's the set design, it's the locations, it's the color palettes, the whole thing.
And when you were given the White House, what did you think when they said you're going to design the residence, the state floor, all of these rooms in this historic building?
Well, when I read the script by Paul Davies, I was really struck by the humor, but I was also struck by the fact that this was an amazing opportunity to transcend just creating a replica of the White House to creating a very unique version of the White House, because it takes place in an alternate reality with a fictitious president. Mm-hmm. So it gave us permission to really dream up something that only existed within the walls of our show. And the other thing that was really fun about the writing is that it had whimsy in the storytelling, where Paul would describe these dollhouse shots where the camera would pull back and up through the walls and through the windows and through the doors. So that was an interesting twist to make it even more challenging.
Well, I love the dollhouse effect. As you know, at our People's House, the White House Experience in Washington, we've created something similar with the crosscut of the White House and all the different floors.
I know that one, yeah.
So we really appreciate your work at that. And we saw that, we thought, oh, that looks familiar. So when you're given a project like this, something that is an iconic real building that has multiple facets, it's a home, it's an office, it's a ceremonial stage, it's a museum, a lot takes place in this building. Is it a daunting task, an exciting task? How do you take it on?
Oh, it's totally terrifying. I felt a tremendous responsibility to reproducing the house as a character. It's not just a setting, it's a real character in the show, meaning that the murder that happens as the audience is trying to figure out what's going on, the rooms and the layout ends up being a very central part of that mystery. And so I wanted to make sure that the audience was understanding and learning about the White House, and that they would come away from watching the show with a real understanding, a new understanding of the interior of the White House. When I was doing research, I came across Robert Nicholson's 1968 cutaway illustration of the White House that was in National Geographic. And
Oh, yes.
what struck me about that was I was surprised to learn that before 1968, the American public didn't really know what was inside the White House. There are a few famous paintings and of course the White House and the $1 bill, but no one really knew how big the White House was in actuality, that it had a basement and a ground floor and a state floor and a second floor and a third floor, plus the west wings and the east wings. So this, I thought, could be another opportunity for the American public to really gain a comprehension and understanding of the ins and outs and all the secrets inside this house.
I think it's wonderful that the White House as a building, as a space, was a character in this story. And that's the way it is in reality. It is a soundstage, really, for American history that takes place every day in that space and has for presidents since John and Abigail Adams moved in 1800. So tell us where this was all done. Where did this take place in building these sets?
Well, we had Raleigh Studios in Hollywood at our disposal, right across the street from Paramount, which is a great old lot that goes back to Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks Sr.'s time. And we had 7 stages there, plus a mill, plus the offices, all on one property. So it was really an incredible resource for us to dream up this entire setting for the show.
Tell us what a mill is.
Oh, a mill is where construction puts their equipment, their saws and their table saws, and they have to like pre-build a lot of this stuff. They need space to work, basically.
So it's made in parts and then brought together, and do you assemble it like a puzzle?
Yeah, it's like we'll set up, we have prop makers who are like carpenters, and we have painters, a whole team of painters, plasterers, greens department. They're all working outside the confines of the stage. Sometimes they're working on the stage, but as we're shooting, there becomes a space problem where we need places to be and places to work. So they'll be building flats or pieces to the set, stairs or fireplaces, and then those pieces will be pre-built and then brought into the stage to be assembled on set.
The thing that I appreciate most about what you did is the realism of it. I look at the pictures, I looked at the program, watching the residents, and I think, did they record this in the White House? Because it is so realistic. There's some other shows I won't mention, but you watch them and they're in the White House, but they take a liberty with the space, like in the West Wing portion of the offices. They're like rabbit warrens of these large spaces. But you really pay attention to detail and reality.
Well, that was in my early conversations with Paul Davies. That was something that was by design. We wanted to not only pay tribute to the house, but we felt that it was important to create an authenticity to the set design. Now, you always have to make changes based on the real world Newtonian physics of the sizes of the sound stages that you have and where the story needs to take place, where cameras are going through, which rooms or we're seeing. So that always goes into this kind of complicated equation that defines what the builds are going to be. But we had a lot of support to sort of ring the bell and go for it and create a holistic representation of the building at pretty much every floor of the building. We were given like 7 stages at Raleigh Studios in Hollywood, and each stage had its own floor. So the two largest stages there, which have these elephant doors in between that can open up, together they become, I think, the biggest stage in Hollywood. And that became our state floor, which was an almost one-to-one recreation of the entire state floor, including the entire thing, the foyer, the central hallway, the state dining room, red room, green room, blue room, even the pastry kitchen that's in the mezzanine above the butler's pantry, which is, a lot of people don't know that there's actually that space is truncated and cut in half. So the other stages were smaller, so we had to make very careful decisions on how to sort of squeeze them and stretch them and fit them into those stages. But we had to follow the narrative and the story that took place to make it feel like the entire floor was there, but not necessarily built. To answer your questions about the authenticity, there's a lot of information that we found on the Library of Congress website and the Habs survey.
Oh, yeah, the Habs drawings are incredible.
The Habs drawings are absolutely phenomenal, and they exist at very high resolution, but they're only floor plans. There are no elevations. So we hired a researcher to answer the own mystery. It's like this big mystery about where these drawings and references were. And we ended up assembling 5,000 images or something or more of every book printed about the White House, every website, your own association's website. We scoured through it.
Thank you.
It was very, very helpful, because on the White House Historical Association's website, you actually have these chapters on your site about each room and the history behind it, which we found phenomenally helpful in designing the spaces. Then we actually found set design surveys from other shows where set designers had gone to DC for the movie Dave back in the 90s.
Sure. I love Dave.
And we've pulled out those original drawings and looked at those. And so we started assembling like a puzzle piece of research that helped us recreate all those details to pretty high accuracy.
So you didn't go to the White House and take notes and look in rooms and behind doors and down corridors, or had you ever been to the White House before?
We didn't go to the White House for this because I think it was just time. We were right up against it where we didn't really have time to do a big survey of the White House because it required, it would require weeks of organization. I had been there 15 years ago on the White House tour, and I had some photos.
Great memory then. That's great.
I had a great memory, and that really stuck with me. And I remember certain things. And one thing that really stuck with me about the house was that it's really an old house, and it feels like an old house, and it's not brand new. A lot of these other films and TV shows, when they recreate the White House, they build it like it's a brand new house. But it's not. You can really feel the layers of aging and the layers of paint. And you can, if you walk around the house, you can see where the vacuum cleaners have bumped up against the molding, and it's kind of like dented in around the corners, just like a real old house.
Well, the current chief usher would not like hearing that, but that's okay.
But this is it's just reality. Yeah. Even if you go to a palace or in Europe, you'll feel the age, and it's something that it doesn't look dirty or cheap or bad. It's just the reality of an old home.
A former colleague of mine who actually then went and worked in the usher's office of the White House, Haley O'Connor, worked with you.
Oh, she was fantastic.
And was a resource for this. Tell us about that and how that worked.
Well, Haley was absolutely central to our work in recreating the White House because, as you know, there are areas of the White House that are off limits and that are not documented. For example, like the chief usher's office, her boss, there are no photos of the chief usher's office anywhere. It's in the mezzanine floor above as you walk in through the foyer. So she pointed us in the right direction to find just enough research to recreate that room, because obviously it's a very important room to recreate with B.B. Winter's character being the chief usher.
Anything interesting you found in recreating the usher's office?
Well, Haley told us this really interesting story that Paul folded into his writing, and that is that in the usher's office, there's a mail slot in the wall. It's like a regular mail slot that you put letters through that flips open, and it gives the usher the ability to look down into the foyer and look at the north entrance to see who's coming in and out of the house. And it's such a delightful detail. Of course, there needed to be surveillance before the era of closed circuit television.
Sure.
And they literally just designed a little slot, like a little secret peephole that we recreated practically for A.B. Winter to be able to look down. And it ended up being a really charming part of the story and something that I had never knew existed. I think most people don't know.
Well, I love to point that out as you're ending the public tour from the cross hall into the entrance hall to go out the north door. And you can point that out and see that from the usher's office level looking down.
You can see a little rectangle, and it's just painted the same color as the wall, and you'd miss it if it wasn't pointed out to you.
That's right.
So, and then there was also the problem of trying to recreate the basement, which is another space that is hardly documented at all. And I ended up finding it took me months to find information about the basement, but I found an old blueprint on an auction website that had been auctioned off 10 years ago that had a rough survey, but it didn't have any detail, and it was really low res, so that was helpful. And I got together a few blurry photos and things but I talked to Haley quite a bit about what it felt like. And that space was really about recreating a feeling. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was so interesting and what's interesting about the show is that there's an upstairs, downstairs kind of quality.
Sure.
And as you said before, the White House is not just one thing. It's a home, it's a museum, it's an office. There's a whole staff who keep this place running, almost like Steamliner or something.
Incredible staff. I think most people are familiar with certainly the press secretary and the people that surround the president when they see him on television. But there's this infrastructure.
Yeah.
Much of it came to life in the residence, but it keeps that place going and operating. And some of their families, they can be generational that work there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Paul wrote that generational story into the show in a very interesting way. You have people who have worked 40 years or 50 years in the White House, and they're second or third generation there. So there's a real pride and there's a family behind the first family, I guess, meaning there's a very tight-knit community of people who work to keep the White House running. And I thought that was a very interesting facet to the story, to show the audience an aspect of that hasn't really been shown before. So, there's the formality of designing and recreating the White House, but then there's the story and the backstory of these very intimate spaces in the basement or in the mezzanine floor that you get to see and understand what these people are about and where and how they live and who they are. And I think in a very beautiful way. They're real characters and with real passions and very passionate about their work in the executive mansion. So in the basement, we've got to recreate the painter's room and the florist, and there's a furniture repair shop down there, and there's heating and air conditioning in the laundry room, and it is really delightful to have to kind of figure out these little nooks and crannies. And I really enjoyed the contrast between being in the basement and it's, with its low ceilings and its concrete and green tile walls, and then going upstairs to the opulence of the ground floor and the state floor. There's a real contrast there that was fun to play with.
Is there anything that Haley said, no, that you didn't get that right? That is not it. That you kind of wrestled with getting exactly right?
Well, actually, quite the opposite. She came to visit the set, and she said that when she was walking from the solarium on the third floor to the hallway, she was kind of freaked out because she was walking down the ramp that we recreated, and we got the angle of the ramp right. So her muscle memory was like, oh my God,
deja
this
vu.
feels like I'm walking actually through, I'm at work again.
That is a sign of real success.
So she was really spooked by some of the details. There were a lot of little details that she picked up on that a lot of people wouldn't pick up on, like the presidential staircase. We have these beautiful crystal orbs on the finials on the newel posts, and there are lots of little details like that we weren't sure if anybody would notice, that were there. The whole thing became kind of a labor of love as we were doing it, to be like, well, how can we make this an homage to this building through its recreation? And it was something that the entire art department got really bowled over with. It became our lives for 2 years. We had 144,000 pounds of flooring in the show, then 200 doors and 60 rooms and lots of stuff. So we had a room in the art department that was just full of hardware, like knobs and hinges and HVAC registers and finial caps and extra pieces of molding and things. There's just a whole room packed with this stuff. It was just, the volume was really extraordinary.
Is there something about the experience that you learned that you thought was most compelling about the White House itself?
Well, what's really great about my job is I get to become sort of an expert about a new subject matter with every project. And I didn't really know much about the White House going into this project. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to be paid to have like a degree in all things White House. Because to do this job, you have to really do a lot of research, and there's lots of learning. And so I learned so much about this White House. I learned that, for example, the windows that you see on the outside of the White House, some of them aren't real windows. I never thought of that before, that when you go inside the White House, they're just walls, because otherwise you wouldn't have enough room to put furniture and paintings and things. So the outside is sort of, it's a facade, but it's a little bit of theater. When you go inside, there's lots of little cheats, and of course, there's all of these little secret passageways and secret stairs and things that there was no way of me knowing anything about that, but we were able to show that aspect for the first time as well.
Well, as you're looking at the house from Pennsylvania Avenue, or even when you're on the public tour and you come in on the ground floor, you go up to the state floor and you know the residence is above you, but you get the definite feeling that there are 2 or 3 floors. But as you know, they're the mezzanines, the multiple layers. And so what you see optically, maybe you think, oh, I'm going to design this 3-floor scenario. It is much more complicated than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's much more complicated. I had, as I was, even in the first couple of weeks, I was very surprised to learn that there were mezzanine floors. That's not something that's on the tour or really explained.
Exactly.
So what they've done is they've sliced through some of these floors, which are quite tall. They're 20 feet or 18 feet between floors, and they create 2 floors within that space. So there's a pastry kitchen above the butler's pantry. There's another office above the assistant usher's room off the foyer, and there's another floor up the usher's staircase. I was also really surprised to know that, like, you have all these stairways. There's so many stairways in the White House. There's this delightful spiral staircase, this little spiral staircase that goes all the way from the basement, and it goes up the ground floor to the kitchen, and then it goes up into the butler's pantry, and then finishes up in the pastry kitchen. And it's only about 2 feet wide. It's this delightful little thing. And I thought that was, I knew we had to do that, to recreate that, because I had never seen that before. And then the staff uses the usher's staircase, which goes all the way through the entire house, which I thought was really interesting. And we built that as well. Of course, the most famous stairs are the presidential staircase, which we reproduced. And then the stairs that, or spoiler alert, a big part of our story, are the secret stairs. We call these the secret stairs, which are between the 2 residence floors, the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor, and are located behind these panel doors, these push doors that sort of disappear into the walls. And those are special stairs that the first family used to get between their private residences.
I'm curious about one thing. When you did the Blue Room, rather than interpreting the current Blue Room, you used a 1960s setting. Why did you do that? Well,
again, I saw this show as an opportunity to create our own White House, because we are in a fictitious presidency. And so I looked through all of the different rooms through the different administrations. And I was really inspired by Jackie Kennedy's work with Maison Jansen in Paris. And she famously redid the Blue Room. And I thought, first of all, it's really a blue room, where now it's kind of a beige room with blue accents.
Yes.
Which isn't, I just didn't find it nearly as attractive. And so I was really went back to that design, because I just thought it was so much more elegant and impactful. Plus, I wanted those rooms to be very bold in their use of color. So the red room, all the red in the show is cardinal red. We tested all the red to make sure that it photographed beautifully. So the red room was cardinal red with custom wallpaper. We went to great lengths to make the walls look like they were actually silk fabrics as well, not just paper. And then the green room, we had wallpaper shipped in from Italy, this beautiful green moire wallpaper that was really quite stunning. So it had to do with really controlling and creating a specific color story.
The Zubair wallpaper that's in the diplomatic reception room, which is the scenic wallpaper created or acquired by Mrs. Kennedy.
Yeah.
An extraordinary feat to reproduce that.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting because I had seen that wallpaper before in the old governor's mansion in Baton Rouge. They have the old governor's mansion is sort of a mini White House. It's inspired by the White House.
Interesting.
And when I was doing the film Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, I scouted that house as a potential location for the White House work in that film. And in the foyer, I think it's in the dining room, they have Zubair wallpaper. It's the same landscape. So I had taken photos of that Zubair,
Oh, interesting.
the panels, and kept them on a hard drive somewhere. And I pulled it out when we were recreating the Zubair wallpaper, because it's really beautiful. 1834 is when it was made, and Zubair is still in business in Paris, and they still have the original wood panels for the printing, and it really is like a lost art. It's stunning. Their use of color in the panels, it's just absolutely breathtaking. It's incredible.
And that had been conserved from another historic home in Maryland when Mrs. Kennedy used it. It was not new directly from Zubair, so it had a life before it was in the White House. Once the rooms are built or conceptualized, you have to furnish them. And then there are all of the details, like for the china and the elements that you see.
Yeah.
Tell us about creating those things.
Well, I worked very closely with set decorator Helena Suolop, who had to fill all these rooms. That was her job, to fill all the rooms with furnishings and the paintings and the drapery. She had a full-time drapery expert who custom made all of these 14, 15-foot tall curtains for the different rooms. That was just an enormous undertaking. I worked with property master Trish Gallagher Glenn. She was tasked with creating all of the White House china. The show takes place during an official White House dinner.
State dinner.
Dinner, with the Australians. And as this is a fictitious presidency, we had to create their china. We made 200 different place settings, all custom, out of real china that was fired with gold inlays.
That's incredible.
It was an incredible.
Having been through the china making process, that is itself a daunting task.
Yeah, we found a company in Los Angeles that does small batch custom sort of plateware, and it looked phenomenal. It looked really, really phenomenal. But Trish had to create. There's so many props in the show, and we ended up calling her, she's the property master, but we called her the puzzle master, or the clue master, because she had to create the clues that Cordelia Cup finds along her way. And there were custom clocks and anything an actor touches is a prop, right? So, and there's hundreds of them in the show, and they all had to be bespoke creations and designed, and it was a huge amount of work.
So from the time that you get this opportunity to undertake this project until the sets begin being used, how much time is that? How much time do you have to do the research and the conceptualization and the building, and then the first ones start to be used?
I think I started about 16 weeks out, I would say, something like that, which sounds like a lot of time. But the first setup was the third floor, followed very quickly afterwards by the state floor. And what happens is I have a relatively small team in the art department. I have, 3 or 4 set designers who do the drafting. I have a graphic designer, a couple of art directors, a coordinator, and a graphic designer. It's like jam-packed. So we do the first sets that are shooting first, but we can't get it all done on the first day. So we're literally building the plane as we're flying it, meaning over the course of the show and the shoot, we have to have every set ready perfectly on the day that it's going to shoot. So we're building and dressing while we're shooting, and then as the company is done with one set, they'll go into the next set. This entire production was 2 years long from start to finish. Part of we had a delay in the middle because of the work stoppages with the writers and actors.
Sure.
But so that kind of delayed it 5 months, but it was still like a monumental amount of time and a lot of shooting.
Are you present when the cast walks onto the set for the first time?
Yes. On this show, it was really a delightful experience when the cast came through. We had a table read, what's called a table read, where the cast sat and read through the first 2 episodes. Part of that is just for Shonda Rhimes and Paul Davies to hear the cadence of what's written on the page. It was also a neat opportunity for everybody to meet each other. And I actually took them all on a tour of the White House.
Oh, that's true.
Which I felt like I was the tour guide of the actual White House, because many of them had never been to the White House. And so it was an opportunity also for them to learn and understand the setting where this murder mystery is taking place. So it was it was really fun. It was really fun to show them around and help them understand all the little Easter eggs that we were putting into the set.
I know that there have been a number of shows that have depicted spaces in the White House, but is this the largest number of rooms and spaces that you're aware of that's been created?
Yeah, it's the biggest White House set ever built for television or film in their 120-year history, which is something I'm pretty proud of. We have like over 60 rooms of the White House that we recreated, and I think 30,000 square feet of scenery.
Wow.
So it was a lot. It was a very accurate recreation, not only of the interior, but we also built the south portico right up against the soundstage at Raleigh. And we built the south lawn in Palos Verdes at a botanical garden. And we even built a fictitious orangerie sort of building that doesn't actually exist on the White House grounds, but we needed one for the story. But we built it so you could believe that it may be in the trees somewhere on the grounds. I was inspired by Dumbarton Oaks.
Oh, yeah, sure.
There's a really beautiful building there built in 1810.
In Washington.
Yeah, that looks it's a federal style, and it looks like it would be not out of place on the White House grounds.
If you were to walk in the White House today, what is the space that you would first want to see in real life based on what you created?
Well, I'd love to go up to the residence, because a lot of people, that's off limits. Even the Secret Service doesn't go up to the residence, which is interesting. Like, it's a very private space, but I would love to have an opportunity to. I've always wanted to go in the president's bathroom. That's another space that you can't find much information on. We did our own version of that, and I was always there's a whole storyline about the water pressure.
Right.
In the White House.
That's right, I remember that.
And I'd be very curious to know if that's actually the case.
So you'd run right in, go to the president's shower, and turn on the shower.
I'd turn on the shower and be like, it is very powerful. That's quite the...
And here I was expecting the Blue Room or something very formal, but that's
those are all spaces that anyone can go to.
That's true.
You can make an appointment and go on the tour and see those spaces. I'd love to go to the basement. I mean, I think the basement is a fascinating... It's like going on the Titanic and going to the engine room.
Well, it's like looking behind the set in a production like you do.
Yeah, and I think those are the spaces that I find the most intriguing, are the parts, the nooks and crannies in the White House that aren't on the tour, that no one really gets an opportunity to creak open the door and look behind.
Right.
And I think that's
and
really
those
interesting.
are the real people: the florist, electrician, plumber, usher, butler, housekeeper, chef. These are the people that make that house live, breathe, work, presidency after presidency after presidency, and bring it to life and really take care of it for the American people.
Well, exactly right. And when you look at these rooms and you recreate these rooms, I was really struck by how intimate they all are. When we rebuilt the kitchen, for example, it's not a giant kitchen.
No, not at all.
And that kitchen has to feed the first family, and any of their private events oftentimes some of the state dinners are run through that kitchen. Sometimes they have an ancillary kitchen that comes in depending on the size of the state dinner, but it's not a giant kitchen. And so I was really struck by just the compact nature of everything. The pastry kitchen is tiny.
Very tiny.
Very, very
Well, it was
tiny.
just made as sort of in this little mezzanine area,
As an
carved out
afterthought.
as an afterthought. And really recently, in modern presidencies, and how they create those glorious, wonderful desserts and confections is
they have world-class
incredible.
chefs who come through there who have worked with some of the finest restaurants in the world. They come through and they work for a time in the White House. And I'm sure they're much tighter quarters than what they're used to in the real world. It's quite extraordinary.
Right. Well, there comes a time when the show is wrapped and is off to be seen and win awards. And what happens to the set when everybody leaves?
Well, a lot of these TV shows, they're struck. We have to strike the sets and they go in dumpsters. Unfortunately, it's very sad. I think a lot of the furnishings and the paintings and things were saved and are at the prop houses in Los Angeles. Warner Brothers has a really tremendous prop rental department with what they call the White House collection, where because there are so many shows that
They probably have a greater White House collection than the White House collection has.
They have a pretty good White House collection.
Yeah.
And so I feel good about the fact that we've restored just about every stick of rental furniture in town by either reupholstering or refinishing or reprinting the paintings, reframing. We rebuilt the South Portico sconces, which are about 4 feet tall. And we did those to the original drawings. So there were some that were available as rentals that were half as good. Now we have like 100% total perfect replicas in town for the next show. So we gave back, and for the next time anybody's crazy enough to rebuild the White House, at least they'll have a running start.
History and realizing that the White House is not about the current occupant, but about all those who have gone before and all those who will follow. What was your sense of history as you created this, and did your appreciation for that evolve and change as a result of this work that you did?
Well, I was really struck by the resilience of this building and how it's survived so many events that threatened to topple our nation, and as an immigrant, as an American immigrant, I was really inspired by this building with its scars and all, I mean, it was burnt down famously by the British and then rebuilt. And in the 1950s, it was completely gutted. And you see these photos of the house where everything's gutted except the outer walls.
Yeah, you look down and see the dirt
It's
in the
unbelievable.
sub-basement.
Those photos are unbelievable. And to really understand that the interior of the White House is all made out of steel, like an office building. That was very inspiring and interesting to me. And just the power of the engineering. I mean, the engineering of the house is really formidable. It's a magnificent building, and it's built very, very well. But the amount of work that it's taken to sort of preserve that heritage and that story is really, really quite something. In the ground floor, you can still see parts of the original walls and outer walls and things, and they've preserved that whole story. To go and sort of see the house is to see the history of America.
That's exactly right.
Which I think is very inspiring. You can kind of see the details and the layers of history, but it takes a lot. It takes an army to keep that house, to preserve the house, to keep the spirit of it alive, to maintain it, and that amount of love for the building is really inspiring.
Architecturally and design-wise, could you see the influences of the French influences, the Italian influences on the house?
Yeah, you can definitely see that because I did some research about the original architect, and you can see his work in Ireland, and his other homes have many of the same details as the White House. So that's very interesting to see how his work ultimately ended up with this building and the influences he was, drawing from in Italy and France and things.
Yeah,
and,
James Hoban, the Irish-born architect of the White House, and Just last week, I was in Dublin and looked at Leinster House, which was the inspiration for the building
Very
itself.
similar.
And it does take
There's
you
some
aback. And
similarities,
there's the Newcomen Bank nearby is a place that he was familiar with. And you go in, and there are these oval spaces, proportional and, to me, spatially exactly like the oval spaces in the White House, the diplomatic reception room, the blue room, the yellow oval room. And I guess we create things that we are familiar with and that we have experience with, and which what he did. But it is an amazing thing that he brought those talents from Ireland, where he was trained, and they are preserved forever in the exterior and interior of the White House.
Well, to your point, also these oval rooms, building an oval room is not easy. It's not an easy shape and to do without any technology back then. It must have been, I can only imagine, it really required amazing artistry to even map that out and build those three rooms perfectly, one on top of each other. It would have been much easier to make square rooms or octagonal rooms, but he chose these oval rooms, and they're the most stunning rooms of the house for sure. When we were starting to budget these rooms, we turned in the budget for the blue room, and there was a little bit of sticker shock there. And the producer asked, "Why is this so expensive? It's one room." And I said, "Well, it is the greatest room in America. I can't think of another room that is more grand and opulent than the blue room of the White House. It's with its dental molding and the fireplace and the beautiful paneled doors, and we did all real oak marquetry floors too." Partly because we just needed them to be strong for the shooting company over the many months that we're shooting in there. But yeah, these rooms are quite spectacular.
Is there a favorite that you really hated to let go of? Would it be the blue room?
Well, my favorite rooms were the rooms that we got to put our own stamp on. We recreated the White House library at 7/8 scale. 7/8 is usually a pretty good sheet because again, you can't do everything one-to-one. There's no soundstage in the world where we could do the entire White House at 1-to-1 scale. But I did the library in Hague blue with these rust accents, and it was really so much more interesting looking than the beige White House library that we have today. And we even filled the room with all of the same books that existed.
Yeah, I noticed that. The titles, that was incredible. You could have just put anything that nobody would really focus on, but you went with the exact titles, many of the exact titles that are in there.
We actually got our hands on the survey of the titles that was done in the 1960s of all the books, that 1,700, I think 1,730 book titles. And Paul Davies, who is the showrunner, is a real book lover. So he loved the idea of getting close. Plus, there's a story thing where A.B. Winter goes and he hides a clue in the book. So we found about 1,500 titles that actually existed there. So it was really a pretty good representation. But we got to do our own thing with that room. We got to do our own thing with like the solarium, which is a really beautiful room overlooking the South Lawn. And we did that all in dark jewel tones with like a piano finish blue ceiling and green, like emerald green velvet furnishings. And that was so striking and so different than anybody else has done in the White House that was immediately everybody's favorite room. I think Paul took the furniture afterwards and put it in his living room. He liked it so much, so he still has the furniture from that room. Yeah, so there were rooms like that only existed between the confines of our show that ended up being unique to us, to what we did.
I love how you created a White House inspired by different generations of its rooms. Like you mentioned, Mrs. Kennedy's blue room, not the current day blue room. If you were to recreate a house for, say, a movie about Abraham Lincoln and a period of time that's different than our own, what would the challenges be to you, or how would you approach that differently, or would you?
Well, what's so interesting about the White House is that it's alive and it changes, and even in the current administration, it's going through changes, kind of
this is
famously.
Very true.
So telling the story about a time period is also telling a story about the White House. And the White House serves as a great catalyst for putting the audience into a moment in time. In Abraham Lincoln's time, the interior of the White House was completely different. The layout was completely different. When I did that for Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, I actually went to Galliard Hall in New Orleans, which was a building that was built in the similar era, but was not, it didn't need to be a complete authentic interpretation or recreation of the interior of the White House, because not many people know what the interior of Abraham Lincoln's White House looks like. And it was a different kind of movie, right? But it's very striking when you do the research and you look at these past administrations, how each administration puts their own stamp onto the building. It becomes a real representation or mirror of what the tastes are of the time and what's going on outside of Washington, D.C. And I think that's really fascinating to take the White House and look at that in context with what's going on in American history as well. It's quite fascinating. For example, like Teddy Roosevelt's White House was such a reflection of his own personal bravado and style. It was very macho. It had a very macho interior.
Taxidermied heads of animals in the state dining room.
Can't have enough dead animals on the wall.
Right.
Chairs made up of buffalo horns and things like that. And so it does end up being very much a reflection of the ethos of the president. And I think that's very fascinating. And I can't think of another building in America that has that same relationship, relationship with the resident.
And it does evolve and change. We at the White House Historical Association focus on the history of the whole house, where so James K. Polk and McKinley and Roosevelt are just as important to us as a Bush or a Trump or a Biden in looking at what the house was like when they're there and how it has changed and evolved. And so what you've done is a wonderful benefit to our education mission to teach the broader public about these spaces and have them see them in different ways and learn about them. And I hope your show encouraged people to want to know more about the White House itself when they see it in an entertaining format and not just a news format.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was just such a delight to recreate the house and to learn so much about it, and then to be able to manifest that learning in these physical sets. We took a lot of joy in putting these details in there for folks to see on the show and to sort of rewatch the show and want to ask more questions. And your website at the White House Historical Association is a great resource for people to learn more and a great jumping off point. I'd point people to that probably as a first primer to launching more interest in learning about the house.
Well, thank you. We have a treasure trove in our digital archives that we make available images free to students and scholars and others using them for research purposes. We do a nice little business in licensing as well. When Steven Spielberg did his Lincoln movie, he came to us for an array of images on the Lincoln era White House, wanting to get that exactly right. So it's important to make these resources available for students, whether you're a young third grade book report student or someone in the professional ranks wanting to depict it exactly as it is now or was at a certain period of time. The realism of what you did, when I look at these images and photographs we have here or watch the show on television, I'm like, I think, is this the real thing or is this the replica?
There are a couple of shots that even I have a hard time looking and noticing the difference. The cross hall on the state floor is very close. It's very close. It's very difficult. We even did the barrel ceiling.
Oh yeah, sure.
Which was I can't tell you how hard that was it was very difficult to recreate, but we recreated the barrel ceiling and the whole cross hall almost 1-to-1, going into the foyer and everything. So it's fun to see these images and these pictures and then have to do it like a double take and go, oh no, that's ours. Yeah. That we did that one.
Well, I think you've made a wonderful tribute to the men and women who work in this house behind the scenes and the roles that you have depicted in the show and the places where these people worked on all levels of the White House structure, and just an amazing job. And I as I said, it's heartbreaking that it doesn't still exist, that it was made and used and then is no more. But
Well, it lives on.
It lives on in the
Netflix,
artistry.
and anybody can watch the show
right.
forever.
That's right. Thank you for what you do and how you bring history to life in a creative, innovative, beautiful way, even a perfect way. That we have an imperfect building and imperfect in many ways, but what you create in this art and inspired by the real White House, I think is masterful. I'm just so grateful for you to share that with us and what it meant to you to do this and how you undertook it.
Well, thank you, Stuart. It was really great chatting with you about it. Thank you.
Great. And maybe you'll do another White House one day, and can't wait to see that.
Well, we still have the drawings. I still have all my research. So, yeah,
That's
maybe
great.
one day.
Well, thank you for what you did with the residents, and really an honor to have the opportunity to meet you and talk with you.
Thanks. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's been incredible to talk with Francois and hear how he brought this magical White House to life in such a realistic way. I also want to thank Netflix for letting us use their studio here in Los Angeles, as well as providing us so many wonderful photos and clips from the show. Our thanks to Shondaland for that as well. Thank you all for listening and watching today. Be sure to subscribe to the White House 1600 Sessions on your favorite podcast provider so that you never miss an episode, and watch the video version on YouTube and Facebook. Your support of the White House Historical Association makes this work possible. When you become an association member, or when you purchase a book, or even the official White House Christmas ornament, you're helping to fund our education mission through teacher programming, publishing, our White House History Live, in-person and virtual events, and our latest initiative, the People's House, a White House Experience. You know, we're bringing the White House and its storied history to life at 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's open to everyone. So plan your visit today and register for free passes at our website, thepeopleshouse.org. And you can learn more about our work as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization by going to our website, whitehousehistory.org. Thank you very much.